Hello, this is Graham in North London. Hoping everyone is doing okay in a very trying, difficult times for us all. This video is going to be 10 albums that I picked um, that feature drummers, really, quite well-known drummers, very well-known drummers, but also they're not just sort of drummer solo albums. In fact, there's very few of those, but they're 10 albums that I thought the drumming was really represented well, was well recorded, was very interesting, sometimes very complex, sometimes very fiery, um, but other times much more about serving the music. And I've also got a couple of unusual releases in there by well-known drummers, but they are quite obscure 80s sort of solo albums, really, that feature drumming. One of the things to say is that now there are lots of drummer-led albums. Some are really almost just sort of soundtracks to showcase very, very technical drumming. Um, these are all pretty much from 70s and 80s, and there was kind of less of a market for that back then. So people just sort of played albums, put together projects, and gave it their best shot. And I think in a way they were often very, very interesting because sometimes they were a bit hit and miss, but often they were also very, very interesting. There's a couple in this pile of 10 in particular that are just superb albums. So I'm going to kick off with Phil Collins and Brand X. Brand X was a sort of spin-off band. It was a jazz fusion band based in the UK, and it featured various players, but the mainstays were Percy Jones on fretless bass, stellar bass player, who was a little bit in the shadow of Jaco Pastorius, particularly in the 70s. John Goodall on guitar, Robin Lumley on keyboards, Maurice Pert on percussion, and Phil Collins on drums on this album from 1980. It was a slightly more commercial album, and it had a track on it called And So To F, which was featured on a UK music show called The Old Grey Whistle Test. It features a very, very typical Phil Collins fusion-y Weather Report influenced drum beat, but it's superb and it's well worth checking out. Great album on the Charisma label. Genesis, of course, were on the Charisma label, and it's Brand X product. And I think it's some of Phil Collins's best drumming. He's such a superb fusion player. Second up is the second UK album. This album, Danger Money, features John Wetton and Eddie Jobson from the first UK album. People may know Bill Bruford and Alan Holdsworth left UK because of a split of the direction that the band was going to take. Those two went on to play in the band Bruford, Bill Bruford's solo venture, which was certainly critically acclaimed and has some fantastic music. But this album brought in Terry Bozzio, who had played with the Brecker Brothers and Frank Zappa. He came in, and the drumming on this album is just some of the most intense you could wish to hear. Bozzio, for those that don't know, plays an enormous drum kit, and back then it was smaller, but it's still gigantic. It's particularly distinctive, the drumming on this album, for using rototoms, which are a very clattering, loud-sounding drum, toms, not much deadening to the sound, so very, very kind of high-energy, high-ringing drums. Gave it a unique sound. He was playing a double bass Slingerland kit, and his playing on here is just a quote I remember was a nuclear power station in meltdown. And I think that's about right for Terry Bozzio on this album. So there they all are. There's a standout track for Bozzio's drumming called The Only Thing She Needs. But every track is just absolutely stellar in terms of his drum performance, and his commitment is just astonishing. Great album on the EG Records. Next up, a more jazz fusion direction, Alphonse Mouzon. Unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. Very much of the Billy Cobham school, and we'll talk about Billy Cobham shortly. He was a very, very fast, fiery player. This is really a drum showcase album called Virtue. It's got some funk cuts on it, which are absolutely great. Master Funk and Baker's Daughter, Nyctophobia, but the highlight is the Mouzon drum suite, which has 4 parts to it, an improvisation and then some kind of African style music. It really is a tour de force. The kit sounds fantastic again. All these albums feature very well recorded drums. He's got a lot of toms in there, so you get a lot of lovely runs around the toms, which was very in vogue in the 70s, going around the toms at great speed with single strokes. And this is just a great album, really in your face. Alphonse Mouzon, he, as I said, was kind of bracketed and a little bit in the shadow of Billy Cobham, but he was a fantastic, fiery, fast player. Alphonse Mouzon. Next up is an unusual album, very difficult to get hold of, certainly on vinyl, and it's John Heisman from Colosseum and from Colosseum 2. I thought about showing a Colosseum 2 album, and then latterly Paraphernalia. Unfortunately, John Heisman passed away, I think either last year or the year before, certainly quite recently. This is a solo album from his tours with Paraphernalia, and is basically 4 drum solos. So we have here an album of total drum solos, and it's called About Time 2. And it's signed, I got it signed by John Heisman when I met him, and he was pretty surprised that somebody had got this on vinyl. This is 1985, and it's subtitled The Drum Solos 1985. I think it's a great cover. And some notes on the back. The solos are recorded mainly in Germany, from the Paraphernalia tours, as I mentioned. I've also got Barbara Thompson's autograph there. And these feature mainly, again, quite an unusual drum kit, which is the Arbiter Auto-Tune kit. A little bit like the Terry Bozzio sound. The drums had a lot of ring to them, so they were very distinctive sounding. There's certainly no dead sound here. Very full sound to the drum kit. John Heisman was very, very adept at double bass, and some great double bass work here. This is not for the faint-hearted. It's 4 drum solos. It's about a 40-odd minute album. So it really is, you've got to be a drummer to kind of get into this. But it's beautifully recorded, and it's an interesting album. It really is. So John Heisman. Next up, a favourite drummer, sadly passed away again, and this was his first solo album, and it's just terrific. Cozy Powell, Over the Top. What makes this superb album is the drum recording is absolutely top-notch on this album. Lovely full sound to the bass drums. It's a Yamaha kit. I think it was a steel-shelled kit. And the snare is really powerful on this. The compositions are what make this album so good. It's in the jazz fusion vein, jazz rock fusion, I should say, kind of tilting a little bit more towards rock rather than jazz, because Cozy, of course, played with Rainbow, with Jeff Beck, with Cozy Powell's Hammer. He's kind of early 70s band. And then went on to Emerson, Lake and Powell, did a great album with them, Michael Schenker, and of course Whitesnake. I've just got to mention the personnel on this, because they all are featured. So we've got Jack Bruce on bass, and it's one of the best bass albums I've heard as well. Jack Bruce, just phenomenal on this. Don Airy on keyboards, Max Middleton on keyboards, who played a lot of jazz fusion stuff in the 70s and 80s with Jeff Beck, and Bernie Marsden on guitar. We also have Gary Moore on guitar, and Clem Clemson. I thought there was another guitarist. Clem Clemson, who also played with Colosseum. Great album on the Areola label, 1979, Cozy Pal. I've picked this one out, Neil Peart, Rush, Signals, early 80s. So this was kind of more synth Rush. For some, not the most kind of favorite period. I've picked this out because Neil Peart's drumming on this is absolutely top notch and kind of moves into different territories from his early stuff, where it's very, very busy playing the huge kit, lots of runs around the kit. And this is a bit more subtle, but he tackles so many styles on this, sort of futuristic with things like Subdivisions, which is an absolute tour de force, but sort of reggae stuff as well. We've got New World Man, The Weapon, and there's some electronics in there as well. So I just think it represents him absolutely fantastically. Great songwriting, and of course he was involved in the lyrics, Subdivisions, The Analog Kid, Losing It, beautiful song with some electric violin about artists growing old and kind of losing their capacity, so very poignant too. Great album, 1982, Rush, Signals. Okay, 4 to go. Simon Phillips, who I've mentioned before, favorite drummer, another large kit drummer, Protocol. He tours with the band Protocol now, Simon Phillips' Protocol. This album actually came out in 1988. Simon Phillips plays every instrument on it. It's quite basic, so it's a bit of a vehicle for his drumming, but it really is good. It's got good sort of late 80s keyboard sound on it, a bit computerized, but it just gives him room to really stretch out on his huge Tama drum kit. I'll just show you the kit actually. There's Simon Phillips, and there's the drum kit, a gigantic double Tama kit, zillion cymbals. This album was basically a mini album, as they used to call them. You don't really see these now. It's actually a 45. And it also features a drum solo called Wall Street, which is just a live digital recording of a drum solo from a drum clinic, which is where I'd first seen seen him a lot since in Protocol at places like Ronnie Scott's. But they're good, strong tracks. There's a track in particular called Protocol that he still plays with Protocol, the band. The recording of the drums is really special on this. A lot of ring, kind of loud. The bass drums in particular come through really well. So if you love sort of oldish, not old, but older recordings of drums, this is a great album to get. Simon Phillips, Protocol. It's out on CD now, but this is the original vinyl. Okay, probably my sort of first drum hero, Carl Palmer, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I thought long and hard about what to pick here, and in a way, I wanted to show the Emerson, Lake and Palmer Treble Live album, Welcome Back My Friends to the Show It Never Ends, because Carl Palmer, from first track to the end of the album, it's just like a marathon. It's just, his work rate is astonishing. There's a drum solo, but things are taken at breakneck speed as well, things like Tarkus. But I wanted to put a studio album in, and I thought the first album is just, it represents him so well. So many different styles on here, from light pastoral touches of Take a Pebble, very delicate cymbal work, some brushwork as well, to more rocky tunes like the Barbarian and Knife Edge, almost kind of heavy metalish, but with an organ, sort of death organ stuff, to an Emerson solo piece called The Three Fates that features completely different Palmer playing in odd time signatures. There is also a single-handed drum roll played on one of the Three Fates pieces, which he's demonstrated subsequently. There's then Lucky Man at the end with the Moog solo, and his just good basic time accompaniment playing. And then there's his drum feature, which is Tank, which is just superb. It's a kind of psych workout, almost Frank Zappa-esque piece. It's got a recorded drum solo, which is one of the best. It features his absolutely astonishing speedy snare work, very fast right foot on the bass drum, some gong work, of course, back then, which he, incorporated into the live show to great effect. But a beautiful, light, jazzy tune, also some great bass playing. So for me, in a way, it just represents everything. He comes out straight out the box, all guns blazing, and you just get everything of Carl Palmer in this album. Yeah, really, really good, and just fiery as hell. Okay, cheated slightly because I've got a second UK album, and it is, of course, the first one, and it's because I wanted to talk about Bill Bruford, another favourite drummer, and a favourite drum album. Now, Bruford went on to do a lot of solo work, and so I think a lot of people would pick things like his solo work, but also his King Crimson work as his best drumming, and that is absolutely without a shadow of a doubt. But funnily for me, my favourite Bill Bruford album for his drumming is the first UK album, and the sound of the kit again is top notch. So we've got a Rototom kit again, which he went on to play in Bruford. The snare is cranked up tight as it always was with Bill Bruford, but it's just got all his styles on this album, in particular in The Dead of Night, which has got a unusual time signature. I think it's 7/4, some of it. And Bruford is just at his knotty best on this album. Of course, it has Wetton on bass, some of his best bass playing. Alan Holdsworth delivers one of the greatest guitar solos ever in The Dead of Night, just this lovely liquid fluid guitar solo. And of course, Eddie Jobson's keyboards are all over this. Great, great album if you like drums and Bill Bruford. So the last one is probably the best known of the drummer solo albums from the 70s. And it's Billy Cobham's Spectrum. And this album is a jazz fusion classic, again, because of the quality of the writing. The drumming at the time was completely groundbreaking. It kicks off with a double bass drum, really, really up-tempo shuffle, which then was unusual. People had played sort of straight 16s and 32s on bass drums, but this has got a shuffle on the bass drums. Not many people were doing that back then. And it's at breakneck speed, as you'd expect with Billy Cobham. Great picture inside with these Fibes acrylic kit. Terrific album, and of course it features Tommy Bolin on guitar, Jan Hammer on keyboards, and Leland Sklar on bass. So a stellar cast. And the track that a lot of people will know, because I think it was sampled by Massive Attack, of course, is Stratus, with a very slippery, funky bass line. Cobham absolutely in the pocket, but of course, to get there, as ever, he's played an explosive drum solo with amazing speed between the toms and the snare, and of course the bass drums. So Billy Cobham's Spectrum, great cover, a 1973 classic. So that's my 10 drum albums that I recommend for anyone really wanting to explore, where drumming went to in the 70s and 80s. Okay, that's it. Hope everyone is okay, doing okay, and stay safe. And I'll speak to you soon. Bye bye.